The warehouse door slammed shut behind Vesper Albright before she even heard footsteps. She froze at the terminal, her tablet glowing in her hands, the cold Brooklyn wind still clinging to her jacket from the walk across the dock. Rows of steel containers stretched into the dark around her, stacked 3 high, their shadows falling long under the sodium lights. She had 30 seconds left before the system logged her session. She didn't get them. Working late? Kalen Dax stepped out from behind a container stack like he'd been standing there the whole time, arms folded, jaw tight. He wasn't shouting. He never had to. At 27, he ran the largest freight syndicate on the eastern seaboard, and everyone who worked under him knew that his quiet voice was worse than a raised one. Vesper's fingers hovered over her screen. She didn't close the file. That was her first mistake, and she knew it the second his eyes dropped to the tablet in her hands. "I can explain," she said. "You can," Kalen agreed, walking closer, his boots echoing off the concrete. "But I already know what you were doing. You've been in the restricted manifest logs for 11 nights straight. Cargo Bay 4, Cargo Bay 7, always after midnight, always alone." He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she had to tilt her head up to hold his gaze. "You've worked logistics here for 2 years, Vesper. You know exactly what happens to people who go digging where they don't belong." Her heart pounded, but she kept her voice level. "I know what I found." "I don't care what you found." His tone hardened, just slightly, just enough to remind her who was in charge of this terminal, this company, this entire stretch of the harbor. "This company runs on trust. You broke that the moment you touched those files without clearance. So here's what happens next. You're going to write a formal apology, admitting you accessed restricted data without authorization. You'll hand it to my assistant by morning, and then you're going to walk out of here and never come back." Vesper felt something twist in her chest, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was disbelief. "Or?" she asked. "Or I make sure no shipping company on this coast ever hires you again." Kalen said it plainly, like he was reading off a shipping manifest instead of ending her career. "Your choice." For a long moment, the only sound was the distant groan of a crane shifting cargo somewhere down the pier. Vesper looked at him, really looked at him, and thought about how easy it would be to just apologize. Sign the paper, walk away, disappear into some other job in some other city, and let the Dax family handle whatever was happening in Bay 4 on their own. But she didn't come this far to walk away with her mouth shut. "You want an apology," she said slowly, "for finding something that's going to burn your entire company to the ground if nobody stops it." Kalen's jaw tightened. "Careful." "No, you be careful." Vesper turned her tablet around and held it up so he could see the screen. "Because in about 4 seconds, you're going to understand exactly why I couldn't just look away." He didn't move to grab the device. He didn't call security. Something in her voice made him pause, and Vesper had spent enough time reading rooms full of dangerous men to know that pause meant something. It meant a small crack had opened in his certainty. "This is Bay 4's manifest from 3 nights ago," she said, tapping the screen. 40 containers, all logged as textile exports headed for Baltimore, except only 36 of them ever left this terminal. 4 of them were rerouted through a private gate on the north dock, one your own security logs don't even record as active. She swiped to the next screen. It happened again 2 nights later. Different bay, same pattern. Cargo vanishing off the books, moving through a gate that officially doesn't exist. Kalen's eyes moved from the screen to her face and back again, and for the first time since he'd stepped out of the shadows, the certainty in his expression flickered. "That's impossible," he said. "I approve every manifest personally." "You approve what you're shown," Vesper said. "Someone's been feeding you a clean version while running a second set of books underneath it. I traced the diverted containers as far as I could before the trail went dark near an airstrip upstate. Unregistered flights, no tail numbers logged, moving in and out on nights when your terminal shows 0 activity." The warehouse felt smaller suddenly, the containers pressing in around them like silent witnesses. Kalen stood very still, and Vesper watched something shift behind his eyes, anger giving way to something closer to alarm. "Why didn't you bring this to me directly?" he said quietly, "instead of digging through my systems in the middle of the night?" "Because I didn't know yet if you were part of it," Vesper said. "I needed to be sure before I put my name on it. And Mr. Dax, I'm still not entirely sure whose side you're going to choose once you hear the rest of what I found." He looked at her for a long moment, the ultimatum he'd walked in with now sitting forgotten between them. "Then you'd better start talking," he said. "All of it." Vesper glanced once toward the terminal door, half expecting someone else to be listening from the dark, then back at the man who was supposed to have her removed from the building within the hour. "Not here," she said. "If what I think is happening is really happening, this warehouse isn't safe for either of us anymore." Kalen didn't move for a moment. Then he glanced toward the warehouse door, toward the guard post at the far end of the terminal lot, and something in his expression settled into decision. "My office," he said. "Now." He led her past rows of containers, through a side hallway that smelled of salt and diesel, and up a narrow staircase to a small terminal office overlooking the dock. It wasn't the grand corporate suite Vesper had imagined a man like Kalen Dax would keep. This was a working space, cluttered with shipping schedules pinned to a corkboard, a battered desk, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out over the cranes and containers stacked under the harbor lights. He locked the door behind them. "Talk," he said, sitting on the edge of the desk instead of behind it. "And don't leave anything out." Vesper set her tablet on the desk and pulled up a second screen, one she hadn't shown him downstairs. This one wasn't the standard manifest system. It was a portal she'd built herself, stitched together from fragments of shipping data, port authority logs, and flight registries she'd spent weeks cross-referencing on her own time. "Your official manifest system shows everything moving clean," she said. "Every container accounted for, every route logged, every signature matching up. But manifest systems only record what people enter into them. They don't record what actually happens on the ground." She turned the tablet toward him. "This is what actually happens on the ground." The screen showed a map of the terminal overlaid with red markers, each one a container that had been logged as departing through the main gate, but had, according to the sensor data she'd pulled from the port's own tracking beacons, never crossed that gate at all. "Sensor logs don't lie the way paperwork does," Vesper said. "Somebody can fake a signature. It's a lot harder to fake a beacon ping." She tapped one of the markers. "This container left through the North Dock Gate at 2 in the morning, 3 nights ago. The manifest says it was still sitting in Bay 4 at that time, waiting for a driver." Kalen leaned closer, studying the screen with the focus of a man who ran numbers for a living and didn't like what they were telling him. "The North Gate hasn't been operational in 4 years. I had it decommissioned myself after the flood damage." "It's operational now," Vesper said. "Somebody repaired it quietly, off the books, and started running containers through it at night." "Where do they go?" She swiped to a new screen, this one a wider map stretching north out of the city. "I tracked the transport routes as far as the data would let me. They all end at the same place, a private airstrip about 90 minutes upstate, registered to a shell company that doesn't show up under any name connected to your family or anyone else I could trace. No scheduled flights, no air traffic control record of departures, but the beacon data shows planes landing and leaving on the exact nights those containers vanish." Kalen was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the map like he could will it to make more sense than it already did. "How long have you known this?" he asked. 3 weeks. I started noticing discrepancies in the shipping volume reports and thought it was a clerical error at first. Then the numbers kept not matching, over and over, always the same pattern. Off-book containers, false manifests, the North Gate reactivated without anyone in your maintenance department signing off on it. She paused. "That's when I stopped thinking it was a mistake." "And instead of coming to me, you decided to build a private surveillance system in the middle of my terminal." "I told you why. I didn't know who I could trust yet." Vesper met his eyes. "You run a company where cargo can disappear off official records and nobody notices for weeks. That doesn't happen by accident. Somebody with real authority is protecting this operation, and until tonight I had no way of knowing if that person was you." Kaylin's jaw worked, and for a moment Vesper thought he might throw the accusation back at her, might remind her that she was the one who'd broken protocol, the one facing removal from the building. Instead, he pushed off the desk and walked to the window, looking down at the terminal below, at the containers stacked in their orderly rows. "My father built this terminal from nothing," he said quietly. "Every contract, every route, every relationship with the Port Authority, he earned it clean. When he passed the business to me, he told me the day I let it get dirty was the day I'd lost it, no matter how much money kept coming in." He turned back to face her. "If what you're showing me is real, someone is running an operation through my terminal that could destroy everything he built, and they've done it well enough that I never noticed." "It's real," Vesper said. "I wouldn't have risked my job proving it if it wasn't." He studied her for a long moment, and Vesper felt the shift happen, the way his eyes moved from suspicion to something more careful, more calculating. Not trust yet, but the beginning of it. "You said you didn't know if I was part of it," he said. "What convinced you I'm not?" "You could have called security the second I showed you that first screen," Vesper said. "You didn't. You asked how deep it goes instead." She closed the tablet's cover, watching him carefully. Guilty men don't usually want to know how deep the hole is. They just want it covered back up. Kaylin almost smiled at that, though there was nothing light about the look on his face. "Then I suppose you're not walking out of here in the morning after all?" "No," Vesper said, "but you should know something else before you decide what happens next. I wasn't hired by your company to work logistics because I needed a job." His eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" Vesper drew a slow breath. "It means we need somewhere more private than a terminal office with a window facing the dock. What I'm about to tell you is the reason I was standing in Bay 4 at midnight in the first place, and it has nothing to do with cargo manifests." Kaylin didn't ask her to explain herself in the terminal office. He drove her to the DAX corporate headquarters himself, a glass tower in downtown Manhattan that couldn't have looked more different from the warehouse they'd left behind. The ride was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the occasional glance he shot her way, like he was still deciding whether he'd made the right choice, bringing her along instead of calling security after all. By the time they reached his office on the 40th floor, the city lights spread out beneath the windows in a wide, glittering grid. Vesper had decided there was no point easing into it. "I don't work for you," she said, before he'd even closed the door behind them. "Not really." Kaylin turned, arms crossed. "You've had a badge with my company's name on it for 2 years. "I do. It's real. The job is real." Vesper set her tablet on his desk, the same one she'd used to show him the manifest discrepancies, and pulled her jacket tighter around herself. The office was cold, all glass and steel, nothing like the cramped warmth of the terminal downstairs. "But I was placed here 8 months ago by a firm called Ashcroft Dunmore. We handle independent security audits for companies that don't know they're being watched. Shipping conglomerates mostly. Places where a lot of money moves fast enough that irregularities are easy to hide." "Placed," Kaylin repeated. "You mean I've had someone auditing my company without my knowledge for 8 months?" "Your board hired us," Vesper said, quietly, through a subsidiary, after your insurance underwriter flagged unusual loss patterns in your freight claims last year. Nobody wanted you to know because they were worried the source of the problem might be closer to you than anyone was comfortable admitting. Kaylin went very still. "My board went behind my back." "Your board was protecting you," Vesper said, "or trying to. They didn't know what they were dealing with either, not at first. I was supposed to spend 6 months reviewing your operational logs, flag anything unusual, and file a quiet report. That was the whole assignment." She exhaled. "It stopped being a quiet assignment about 3 weeks ago, when I found the North Gate discrepancies." He walked slowly to his desk, sat down, and rubbed a hand over his jaw, the kind of gesture Vesper recognized from men trying to absorb too much information too fast. "So, when I caught you in that warehouse tonight, you caught an auditor doing exactly what she was hired to do," Vesper said, "except this time I'd found something I couldn't just write into a report and forget about." "Why not? That's your job, isn't it? Find it, document it, hand it off. Because it stopped being an internal problem the moment I traced that airstrip, Vesper said. The shell company that owns it, the one I told you about, took 3 weeks to crack even a little. But I finally got a name behind one of the holding entities 2 days ago. She met his eyes. Sable Crane Holdings. Kaelin's expression didn't change, not at first, but Vesper watched the color drain slightly from his face. That's Rourke Halloway's family trust, he said quietly. I know. The Halloways have been trying to buy out my father's port contracts for 15 years. He always refused. Kaelin's voice had gone low, dangerous in a way it hadn't been in the warehouse. You're telling me Rourke Halloway has been running cargo through my terminal, off the books, for weeks, and using my own gate to do it? I'm telling you it's worse than that. Vesper pulled up one more file on her tablet, one she'd been saving. Every diverted container I traced was insured under your company's policy, using falsified weight and content declarations. If those containers are ever discovered, whether by customs, by your insurer, or by federal investigators, the paperwork trail leads straight back to Dax Shipping. Not to Sable Crane, not to Halloway, to you. The silence in the office stretched long enough that Vesper could hear the building's ventilation system humming behind the walls. He's not stealing from me, Kaelin said finally, understanding dawning across his face like a slow, cold tide. He's framing me. If this comes out, it doesn't just damage the business. It could put me in prison. It could destroy my family's name entirely and hand him every contract we've ever held without him lifting a finger to fight for them. That's what I believe, yes. Kaelin looked at her for a long moment, and something in his posture changed, the wariness of an hour ago giving way to a kind of grim, focused resolve. Why are you telling me this instead of handing it to Ashcroft Dunmore and letting them file it with the board? Because the moment I file this report through normal channels, it becomes evidence in a slow-moving corporate review, Vesper said. Halloway will have weeks, maybe months, to bury his tracks deeper before anyone acts on it. But if you and I move on this now, quietly, we can dismantle it before he finishes setting the trap. You're asking me to trust an auditor I caught trespassing 3 hours ago. I'm asking you to trust the evidence, Vesper said. I know exactly how this looks. But you already know I'm right about the North Gate, and you already know your board hired me for a reason. The only real question left is whether you want to spend the next month waiting for Halloway to finish burying you, or whether you want to start pulling apart his operation tonight. Kaelin stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city for a long moment, the lights of the harbour visible in the distance beyond the buildings. There's a distribution hub in Newark, he said finally, without turning around. 2 of the flagged shipments passed through there last week. If Halloway's people are careless anywhere, it'll be a location they don't think anyone's watching yet. Then that's where we start, Vesper said. He turned to face her, and for the first time since the warehouse, something that almost resembled trust had settled into his expression. We leave within the hour. The drive to Newark took 40 minutes, most of it in silence, the highway lights sliding past in long yellow streaks across the windshield. Vesper spent the time reviewing satellite images of the distribution hub on her tablet, memorizing the layout of loading bays and access roads, while Kaelin kept his eyes on the road, jaw tight, hands steady on the wheel, in a way that told her he was holding something back. You've gone quiet, she said, somewhere past the halfway mark. I'm thinking about how long this has been happening under my roof, he said. Every day I walked through that terminal, shook hands with people on my payroll, signed off on reports that looked clean, and the whole time someone was carving a hole straight through the middle of it. You couldn't have known. That's the entire point of falsified paperwork. It's built to be believed. My father would have known, Kaelin said quietly. He used to say a good businessman could feel when something in his own house had shifted, even before he saw it. I used to think that was just something he said to sound wise at dinner parties. Vesper didn't answer that. She recognized the shape of what he was carrying, the particular guilt of a man measuring himself against someone he could never quite outrun. And she'd learned a long time ago that the kindest thing to do with that kind of guilt was let it sit instead of trying to talk someone out of it. The Newark hub came into view a few minutes later, a long stretch of warehouses and loading docks lit by sodium floodlights, mostly quiet at this hour, except for a single security vehicle parked near the entrance gate. Kalen pulled the car into a side lot, away from the cameras mounted over the main entrance, and killed the engine. "This is a smaller operation than the Brooklyn terminal," he said, "but it moves almost a third of our northeast freight. If someone wanted a quiet place to stage a diversion route, this would be it." They approached on foot, Vesper's tablet dark now, tucked into her jacket, both of them moving along the shadowed edge of the fence line until they reached a service door Kalen had a key for. Inside, the warehouse floor stretched out in rows of stacked pallets and idle forklifts, the air heavy with the smell of diesel and cardboard. "This is wrong," Kalen said the moment they stepped inside. "What is?" "There should be a night shift running the loading bays. 3 men, minimum, even this late." He gestured at the empty floor, the forklifts parked at odd angles like they'd been abandoned mid-task. "The hub manager here, Dennis Corwin, has run night operations for 6 years without missing a shift log. This place should not be empty." Vesper moved toward the small glass-walled office at the far end of the warehouse, the door hanging slightly open, a desk lamp still burning inside, though the chair behind it sat empty. Papers were scattered across the desk, a coffee mug knocked over and dried in a brown stain across a stack of shipping forms. "He left in a hurry," she said, stepping inside. "Look at this." Kalen followed her in and crouched beside the desk, studying the mess. Or he was made to leave in a hurry. Vesper's tablet buzzed against her side, an alert she hadn't expected this far from the terminal's network. She pulled it out and frowned at the screen, a soft pulsing signal blinking from somewhere inside the building. "There's an active transmitter running on this floor," she said. "Not part of the standard warehouse tracking system. It's broadcasting on a frequency I don't recognize." Kalen straightened, his expression darkening. "Where?" She turned slowly, following the signal strength across her screen until it sharpened near one of the loading bay trucks parked just outside the office, a flatbed still loaded with containers she recognized from the flagged shipment list. "There," she said, pointing. They crossed the warehouse floor together, and Vesper crouched near the truck's rear axle, running her hand along the undercarriage until her fingers found it, a small black device magnetically clamped to the frame, a single red light blinking in a slow, patient rhythm. "A beacon," she said. "Not a tracking device for cargo. This is a locator, the kind used to guide people to a specific position." She looked up at Kalen, understanding settling cold in her chest. "Someone planted this here recently. Within the last few hours, probably." Kalen's eyes swept the empty warehouse, the abandoned forklifts, the office left in disarray, and Vesper watched the pieces fall into place on his face at the same moment they did in her own mind. "They knew we'd come here," he said. "Or they knew someone from my company eventually would, once the discrepancies were flagged. Corwin didn't run. Someone moved him out and left this behind for whoever came looking." "To track them," Vesper finished. "Which means right now, whoever's watching this signal already knows exactly where we're standing." The floodlights outside flickered once, a brief stutter that might have meant nothing on any other night, and Kalen's hand went instinctively toward Vesper's arm, pulling her back from the loading bay doors. "We need to move," he said. "Now." Vesper didn't argue. She yanked the beacon free from the truck's frame, silencing the blinking light with a hard twist that cracked its casing. But the damage, if there was any coming, felt like it had already been set into motion the moment they'd walked through that service door. "There's a second exit near the loading dock on the east side," Kalen said, already moving. "My car's too far. We go on foot until we're clear of the property line." Outside, the night had gone unnervingly still. The distant hum of highway traffic the only sound carrying over the fence line. And somewhere beyond the floodlights, headlights swept slowly across the access road leading into the lot. They cleared the fence line just as the headlights swung toward the main gate, and Kalen pulled Vesper down behind a row of parked shipping containers before the beam could sweep across them. "2 vehicles," he murmured, watching through a gap in the stacked steel. "Sedans, not company trucks. Nobody who works freight drives like that." Vesper's pulse hammered as she watched the cars roll to a stop near the entrance, doors opening, 4 men stepping out and fanning across the lot with the unhurried confidence of people who expected to find exactly what they were looking for. One of them carried a small handheld device, sweeping it slowly across the ground, and Vesper recognized the motion immediately. "They're tracking the beacon signal," she whispered. "The one I cracked. They probably felt it go dead a few seconds ago." Which tells them someone was standing right where it was planted. Kaylen's jaw tightened. "We need to be gone before they widen the search past the warehouse." They moved low along the container row, working their way toward the far side of the lot where Kaylen's car sat tucked in shadow. Vesper kept glancing back, watching the flashlight beams cut through the dark behind them, close enough now that she could hear low voices calling out to each other across the yard. They reached the car just as one of the beams swept past the edge of the lot, and Kaylen didn't wait for her to fully close her door before he had the engine running, pulling out of the side lot with his headlights off, easing onto the access road under cover of darkness, before finally flicking them on once they hit the main highway. "They'll check the cameras," Vesper said, checking the mirror on her side. "If they know your plate." "They know my plate," Kaylen said grimly, merging onto Interstate 95 south toward Philadelphia. "Everyone in Holloway's circle knows my plate." For a few minutes, the highway stretched empty and calm, streetlights ticking past in a steady rhythm, and Vesper let herself believe they'd actually gotten clear. Then she saw the first set of headlights drop into the lane 3 cars back, matching their speed with a precision that felt deliberate rather than coincidental. "Kaylen." "I see them." A second car appeared moments later, drifting into the lane beside the first, both closing the distance steadily, patient in the way predators were patient when they knew the terrain better than their target did. "They're not trying to catch up," Vesper said, watching the mirror. "They're trying to box us in." The first sedan surged forward, sliding into the lane ahead of them, while the second eased up alongside on the right, leaving Kaylen's car pinned between them with barely a car length to maneuver. Kaylen's hands tightened on the wheel, his eyes flicking between the mirrors and the road, searching for an opening that wasn't there. "There's an exit in half a mile," Vesper said, pulling up a live traffic map on her tablet, fingers moving fast. "But if we take it at this speed, with them boxed around us, they'll follow us straight off the highway." "Then what do you suggest?" Vesper's mind raced through the layout of the exit ramp, the signal patterns she'd studied 100 times during long nights of municipal system audits, back when this had still been abstract data on a screen instead of a matter of survival. She found the access point she needed, a maintenance back door into the regional traffic control network that Ashcroft-Dunmore had used before during infrastructure security reviews. "I can alter the signal timing at the exit interchange," she said. "If I time it right, I can trigger a protected left turn phase that forces cross-traffic to hold and buy us just enough of a gap to get through before they can follow without running straight into oncoming cars." "You can control traffic lights from a tablet in a moving car." "I can control traffic lights from anywhere with a signal if I have the right access," Vesper said, already moving through the interface. "Which I do, trust me." Kaylen didn't answer, but he eased his foot slightly off the gas, positioning the car exactly where Vesper told him to, angling toward the exit lane despite the sedan on their right drifting closer to block the maneuver. "Now," Vesper said, and hit the final command. Ahead of them, the light at the exit interchange shifted early, cutting the cross-traffic's green phase short and holding it red a beat longer than scheduled, just long enough for a gap to open in the flow of cars merging onto the ramp. Kaylen took it without hesitation, cutting hard across the sedan's path, close enough that Vesper heard the blare of a horn behind them as the other vehicle was forced to brake or risk colliding with the traffic Vesper had just held in place. The second sedan tried to follow, but the interchange had already locked into its altered pattern, a wall of cross-traffic rolling through exactly where the car needed to go, and Kaylen's vehicle shot down the exit ramp and onto a side road before either sedan could recover the angle to pursue. Kaylen didn't slow down until they'd taken 2 more turns through a quiet residential stretch, finally pulling into an empty church parking lot and cutting the engine, both of them breathing hard in the sudden silence. "That," he said, staring at her, "was not something I expected an auditor to know how to do." I told your board my job was reviewing operational logs, Vesper said, closing her tablet with hands that hadn't quite stopped shaking. I didn't say all my training stopped there. Kalen looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable behind his eyes, and then glanced at the empty road behind them, silent now, no headlights in sight. We can't go back to the terminal tonight, he said, or my apartment. They'll expect both. I know somewhere, Vesper said quietly. Somewhere off the record, even from your own company files. Somewhere off the record from your own company, Kalen repeated, studying her in the dim light of the parking lot. How does an auditor working an 8-month assignment already have a place like that lined up? I don't, Vesper admitted. I know how to find one on short notice. It's part of the job, knowing where a client's blind spots are, in case I ever need to disappear into one myself. Kalen shook his head slowly. There's a property my father kept, out past Lancaster. Farmland, mostly, with a house on it he used maybe twice a year. It's not in any company file. It's not even under the DAX name. He bought it through a private trust before I was born, and I doubt more than 3 people alive know it exists. That works better than anything I could find tonight, Vesper said. They drove the rest of the way mostly in silence, exhaustion finally catching up with both of them somewhere past the state line, the adrenaline of the highway chase draining out and leaving something heavier behind. By the time Kalen turned the car down a long gravel drive flanked by dark fields, the sky had started to lighten faintly at the edges, the first grey hint of morning still an hour away. The house sat alone at the end of the drive, plain and solid, the kind of place built to withstand weather rather than impress visitors. Kalen let them in through a side door, flipping on lights that revealed simple furniture under a thin layer of dust. Everything exactly as it must have been the last time anyone had stayed there. There's coffee somewhere, he said, moving toward the kitchen. My father never traveled anywhere without it, even out here. Vesper sat at the worn kitchen table, finally letting her shoulders drop from where they'd been locked tight since the warehouse in Brooklyn. Her tablet lay in front of her, dark now, and for the first time in hours she let herself feel the full weight of the night, the fear that had been running underneath the focus the entire time. You should know, Kalen said, setting 2 mugs on the table and sitting across from her. The access codes those men used to plant that beacon and clear out my Newark hub manager. They weren't street-level thugs improvising. Whoever coordinated tonight had real operational knowledge of my company's schedules, my facilities, even which manager to target. You think it's an inside source, Vesper said. I think it has to be. He wrapped both hands around his mug without drinking, staring at the surface of the coffee like it might rearrange itself into an answer. Corwin's disappearance, the beacon placement, the timing of those sedans on the highway right after we left the hub. Someone knew we were coming to Newark before we even decided to go there ourselves. Vesper felt a cold understanding settle over her. Who did you tell? About tonight? About coming here to Newark specifically? Kalen's expression tightened as the question landed. Nobody outside this car. I made the decision in my office after you showed me the shell company name. He paused. Except I mentioned it to Corbin before we left the building, just briefly. He asked where I was headed, and I told him. Who's Corbin? Corbin Mercer, my senior operations officer. He's worked under my father since before I was born, took me under his wing when I inherited the company at 23 and had no idea what I was doing. Kalen's voice had gone quiet, careful, like each word cost him something. He has access to every facility schedule, every personnel file, every operational code across all 3 of my hubs. If someone inside my organization is feeding Halloway information, Corbin has more access than anyone else alive, including me. Vesper watched him carefully, recognizing the particular kind of pain in his face, the specific ache of a man being asked to consider that someone who'd raised him up might be the one taking him apart. I'm not saying it's him, she said gently. I'm saying the pattern fits someone with his level of access. I know what you're saying. Kalen finally drank from his mug, and Vesper watched him visibly gather himself, pushing the personal weight of it aside to make room for the practical question underneath. If it is him, we can't confront him directly. Not yet. He'll have contingencies, Ways to cover his tracks the moment he realizes we suspect him. Then we need something undeniable, Vesper said. Not circumstantial access patterns, direct evidence linking him to Holloway, something that can't be explained away as coincidence. Kalen nodded slowly. The recovered data. My father's third-party server facility in Philadelphia stores the original, unedited transfer manifests for every shipment across all 3 hubs, going back years. If Holloway's operation altered anything in our internal systems, the original logs there would still show the truth, untouched. Is it far? 2 hours from here. He checked the time on his phone, the screen's glow briefly illuminating the exhaustion etched into his face. We should rest for a few hours first. If Corbin really is involved, he'll expect us to move fast and sloppy. Moving slow and careful might be the only advantage we have left. Vesper nodded, though sleep felt impossibly far away with everything still churning through her mind. There's something else you should consider before we go any further into this. What's that? If Corbin really is the source and we corner him with proof, he won't go down quietly, she said. Men like that don't just confess. They fight, or they run, or they take something down with them on the way out. You need to be ready for that, not just ready to prove you're right. Kalen was quiet for a long moment, watching the grey light gathering at the kitchen window as morning crept slowly over the fields outside. I've known Corbin Mercer for 15 years, he said finally. If he's really done this, I need to be ready for a lot more than that. They left the farmhouse a few hours later, the fields outside washed pale gold in the early light, and drove south toward Philadelphia, with the windows cracked to keep them both alert after a night with almost no sleep. Vesper had managed maybe 40 minutes on a narrow couch in the front room, enough to blunt the exhaustion without clearing it entirely. Tell me about this facility, she said, watching the farmland give way to suburban sprawl outside the window. My father built it before digital storage became standard practice across the industry, Kalen said. A private server vault, third-party managed, completely separate from our internal company network. He didn't trust keeping the master records anywhere Holloway's people or anyone else could reach through our own systems. Every transfer manifest, every shipment record gets mirrored there automatically, untouched by whatever changes might get made afterward internally. So if someone altered records in your company's system to hide the diverted containers, Vesper said, the original versions should still exist there. If Holloway's people haven't found a way in already, Kalen's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. Almost nobody knows this facility exists. My father kept the list of people with access under 10 names, and I never expanded it after he passed. They reached the facility a little before noon, a nondescript building on the edge of an industrial park that gave no outward sign of what it held inside, no signage beyond a generic property management placard. Kalen used a physical key and a code only he seemed to know to get them through 2 separate security doors into a climate-controlled room lined with server racks humming quietly in the recycled air. This is it, he said, moving to a terminal at the far end of the room. Everything's here, going back over a decade. Vesper connected her tablet to the terminal and began pulling the archived manifest data for the flagged shipment dates, cross-referencing it against the falsified records she'd already documented from the company's internal system. The discrepancy showed itself almost immediately, container weights and contents that matched what she'd suspected all along, textile declarations masking cargo that had never been logged as anything but fabric and thread. Here, she said, turning the screen toward Kalen. Original manifest before anyone touched it. This container left Bay 4 listed as textiles, same as the falsified version in your current system. But the Vault's copy includes a secondary authorization signature the current system doesn't show. Someone stripped it out after the fact. Kalen leaned in, studying the signature block at the bottom of the digital manifest, and his face went rigid. That's Corbin's authorization code, he said quietly. He signed off on the original diversion himself. Before Vesper could respond, a soft mechanical click echoed from the direction of the entrance doors, followed by the low hum of the outer security system disengaging. Both of them went still. That door shouldn't be opening, Kalen said. Nobody else has clearance. Vesper's fingers moved fast across her tablet, pulling the facility's own limited security feed onto the screen. 3 figures moved through the front entrance, dressed like maintenance workers, but carrying themselves with the same unhurried, deliberate confidence as the men from the Newark lot the night before. "They're not maintenance," she said. "They're here to scrub the servers." "How would they even know we're here?" Kaylin's voice had gone tight, urgent. "Corbin," Vesper said, already pulling the drive containing the mirrored manifest data free from the terminal. "If he signed off on the original diversion, he'd know this vault exists too. He'd know it's the one place that still holds proof of what he did." Kaylin moved fast, grabbing a second backup drive from a locked drawer beneath the terminal and shoving it into his jacket pocket. "There's a service corridor behind the server room, utility access that connects to the maintenance tunnels beneath the industrial park. My father had it built in case the facility ever needed emergency evacuation without using the main entrance." "Lead the way." They slipped through a narrow door behind the last row of server racks, just as voices became audible from the front of the vault, low and businesslike, the particular calm of people who expected no resistance. The corridor beyond was cramped and dimly lit, pipes running along the ceiling, the air noticeably colder as they moved deeper underground. "They'll notice the missing drives within minutes," Kaylin said, moving quickly along the passage. "Once they realize we've already been here. Then we need to be well clear before that happens." Vesper kept pace beside him, tablet clutched against her chest, the recovered data now the single most valuable thing either of them carried. The tunnel opened eventually into a maintenance access point beneath a parking structure 2 blocks from the vault, daylight spilling down through a grated opening above them. Kaylin pushed the grate aside and helped Vesper climb up first before following, both of them emerging into the ordinary bustle of a Philadelphia afternoon, nobody around them aware of what had just happened 2 blocks away. They didn't speak again until they'd reached the car, parked a safe distance from the facility, and pulled back out into traffic. "That confirms it," Kaylin said finally, his knuckles pale against the steering wheel. "Corbin authorized the original diversion himself. 15 years, and he's been capable of this the entire time." "We have the evidence now," Vesper said quietly. "The original manifests, his signature, all of it untouched by whatever he's altered in your internal system since." "It's not enough to just have evidence," Kaylin said, his voice hardening with something that sounded less like grief now and more like resolve. "Holloway sent a crew to scrub that vault the moment he realized we were getting close. That means he's accelerating his plan. Whatever he's building toward, he's running out of patience to wait for it quietly." "Which means we're running out of time to stop him quietly too," Vesper said. Kaylin glanced at her, something grim and determined settling into his expression. "Then it's time we stopped playing defense." They spent the drive back toward the city, piecing together what the recovered manifests actually meant for Holloway's timeline. Vesper cross-referenced shipping schedules against the falsified records still sitting in the company's internal system, and the pattern that emerged made her stomach tighten. "There's a shipment moving through Wilmington today," she said, scrolling through the data. "Rail freight, not truck. 12 containers, all flagged with the same false textile declarations as the others we've traced. According to this, it's scheduled to cross into a connecting freight line by early evening, heading toward the border." "The border," Kaylin repeated. "That's a different scale than anything we've seen so far. Truck diversions through a back gate is one thing. Moving 12 containers by rail out of the country, that's not a side operation anymore. That's the main event." "I think this is what everything else has been building toward," Vesper said. "The smaller diversions, the falsified manifests, even the frame job pointing back to your company's insurance policy. It's all been groundwork for a shipment big enough that once it crosses the border, there's no getting it back, and no way to prove what was actually inside." Kaylin's phone buzzed against the console, and he glanced down at the screen before setting his jaw. "Corbin, asking where I am, whether I made it back from Newark safely." He let the call ring out without answering. "He's covering himself, making sure I don't suspect anything's wrong yet." "Don't answer," Vesper said. "Not until we've dealt with the shipment. The moment he realizes we know, he'll accelerate whatever's left of his plan even further." They reached Wilmington a little before 4, the rail freight yard sprawling out along the Delaware waterfront, rows of container cars stretching under a grey afternoon sky. Kalen parked at a distance, studying the layout through the fence line with the practiced eye of a man who'd grown up around freight operations, even if this particular yard wasn't his own. "The 12 flagged containers should be somewhere in that staging line," he said, pointing toward a long row of cars near the eastern edge of the yard. "If they're coupling that section to the connecting train today, it'll happen soon. Rail schedules don't leave much room for delay." "What happens if we're wrong about the timing?" Vesper asked. "If they've already coupled and moved?" "Then we're too late, and Holloway gets exactly what he wants." Kalen's voice was flat, determined. "So we're not going to be wrong." They moved along the fence line until they found a service gate, unlocked and apparently used regularly enough by yard workers that nobody questioned two more people in dark jackets walking through it with purpose. Vesper kept her tablet low against her side, tracking the container numbers against her flagged list as they moved between rows of parked freight cars. "There," she said quietly, spotting a string of 12 cars near the coupling yard, each one marked with the same falsified textile export codes she'd memorized from the manifest data. "This is the shipment." A yard worker in a reflective vest was already moving toward the coupling mechanism at the head of the string, a portable control unit in his hand, preparing to link the cars to the waiting connector engine idling further down the track. "If he couples that engine, this shipment moves within the hour," Kalen said. Vesper's mind raced through the mechanics of rail coupling systems, information she'd absorbed during an infrastructure security review 2 years earlier that suddenly felt less academic than it ever had before. The electronic coupling controls run through a central override panel, usually near the yardmaster's station. If we can access it before he finishes the manual connection, we can lock the system into a maintenance hold. It won't look suspicious, just a routine safety delay. "Can you do it from here?" "Not from here. I need direct access to the panel itself." She scanned the yard and spotted a small control building 100 yards off, its door propped open, seemingly unattended. "There." They split the distance quickly, Kalen moving to intercept the yard worker with an authoritative stride and a fabricated question about shipment documentation, buying Vesper the handful of minutes she needed to slip into the control building unnoticed. Inside, she found the override panel exactly where infrastructure schematics had taught her it would be, and began working through the maintenance hold sequence with fingers that shook slightly despite her focus. Outside, she could hear Kalen's voice, calm and commanding, asking the yard worker pointed questions about paperwork discrepancies on the shipment, buying precious time while the worker fumbled through explanations he clearly didn't have solid answers for. The panel accepted her override just as the coupling mechanism's status light shifted from ready to hold, the entire string of 12 cars now frozen in place under a system-flagged maintenance delay that would take hours to clear through normal channels. Vesper slipped back out of the control building and rejoined Kalen, who wrapped up his conversation with the yard worker with a brief, businesslike nod before walking with her back toward the fence line, neither of them speaking until they'd put real distance between themselves and the staging yard. "It's done," Vesper said once they reached the car. "The shipment's locked under a maintenance hold. It won't move today, maybe not for several days once the paperwork gets tangled up enough." Kalen exhaled slowly, some of the tension finally leaving his shoulders. "That buys us time, but it also means Holloway will know something interfered with his shipment the moment his people check the status." "Which means Corbin will know too," Vesper said, "and he'll know it wasn't a coincidence." Kalen's expression hardened again, the brief relief giving way to something colder, more resolved. "Then it's time he and I had a conversation. Tonight." "Kalen," Vesper caught his arm before he could start the engine. "If you confront him without absolute proof in front of witnesses, he'll deny everything, and you'll have tipped your hand for nothing." "I know." He looked at her, something steady and certain in his eyes, despite everything the day had cost them both. "That's why we're not doing it quietly. I'm calling an emergency meeting of my entire inner circle tonight at the estate. Everyone who matters to this company will be in the same room, and you're going to bring everything we've recovered." The Dax estate on Long Island looked nothing like the terminal or the glass tower downtown. a sprawling stone house set behind iron gates, the kind of place built to project permanence and old money rather than the daily grind of freight schedules. Vesper had changed into a dark blazer Kaelin's assistant had brought over on short notice, something that would let her stand credibly in front of the men gathered in the study without looking like she'd spent the last 24 hours running through warehouses and rail yards. By the time they arrived, 6 people already sat waiting in the estate's oak-paneled study, chairs arranged around a long table beneath a portrait of Kaelin's father. Vesper recognized none of them by name, but she recognized the type immediately. Senior executives and department heads who'd built their careers alongside the company, all of them exchanging uneasy glances at being summoned on such short notice. Corbin Mercer sat near the head of the table, close to where Kaelin would naturally take his seat, a silver-haired man in his 50s with the kind of composed, avuncular presence that made it easy to understand why Kaelin had trusted him for 15 years. He rose slightly as Kaelin entered, concern etched across his face. "Kaelin, thank God. I've been calling all day. Nobody could reach you after Newark, and then I heard something happened at the Philadelphia vault." "Sit down, Corbin," Kaelin said, his voice even, giving nothing away. "Everyone, thank you for coming on short notice. We have a serious problem within this company, and I need all of you to hear the details together, tonight." He nodded to Vesper, who stepped forward and connected her tablet to the display screen mounted on the study wall, the same recovered manifest data she'd pulled from the Philadelphia vault, filling the room in stark, undeniable detail. "My name is Vesper Albright," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the weight of every eye in the room settling on her. "I was placed within DAX Shipping 8 months ago by an independent security firm hired by your board to conduct a confidential audit. What I found is that over the past several weeks, a significant volume of cargo has been diverted off the official record, falsely declared as textile exports, and routed through an unauthorized gate to an unregistered airstrip upstate." Murmurs moved around the table, several executives leaning forward to study the screen. Corbin's expression remained carefully neutral, sympathetic even, though Vesper caught the faint tightening at the corners of his eyes. "This is deeply troubling," Corbin said. "But surely this points to an external breach, someone hacking our systems or a compromised gate contractor. Kaelin, we should be discussing this with legal counsel, not airing accusations in front of the full team before we understand the source." "I agree we need to understand the source," Kaelin said, "which is why Vesper recovered the original unaltered manifest records from my father's private archive facility in Philadelphia. Records that exist completely outside our internal company network, untouched by whatever changes were made to our current systems." Vesper advanced the screen to the manifest she'd shown Kaelin at the vault, the authorization signature glowing at the bottom of the display, magnified now for the entire room to see clearly. "This is the original authorization for the first diverted shipment," she said. "Before anyone altered the internal records to hide it, it carries a valid company signature code." The room went quiet. Several executives turned to look at the signature block, then slowly, one by one, toward Corbin Mercer. "That signature," Kaelin said, his voice dropping into something colder and more deliberate than Vesper had heard from him yet, "is yours, Corbin. I've watched you sign shipping authorizations for 15 years. I'd know it anywhere." Corbin's composed expression finally cracked, something harder and more desperate flickering underneath. "Kaelin, you can't seriously be entertaining this. Anyone could forge a signature block on a digital document. This woman shows up, an outsider with no history in this industry, and you're prepared to accuse a man who stood beside your family for 15 years based on a screenshot." "It's not a screenshot," Vesper said calmly. "It's a mirrored record from a facility with restricted physical access. The signature was captured at the moment of the original authorization, before any tampering occurred in the company's live system. Forging that would require access to a vault almost nobody knows exists, including, according to Kaelin, yourself." "I've never set foot in that vault," Corbin said quickly, too quickly, and Vesper saw Kaelin's expression harden further at the reflexive certainty of the denial. "I never told you where it was located," Kaelin said quietly. "I only said it was a private archive facility. You just told this entire room you know it doesn't require physical access to reach. The silence that followed was absolute. Corbyn's face had gone pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table, and for a moment, Vesper thought he might simply stand and walk out, might try to brazen through the accusation with nothing but wounded dignity. Instead, something in his posture seemed to collapse inward. 15 years of careful loyalty crumbling in front of the people who'd trusted him longest. "You don't understand what Holloway offered," Corbyn said finally, his voice low, almost pleading. "Not just money, Kaylin. Control of routes your father spent decades fighting for. I was going to be positioned to run half the Northeast operation once the transition was complete. I thought—" He stopped himself, seeming to realize how the words sounded even as he said them. "You thought betraying my father's legacy was worth a promotion," Kaylin said, and the quiet fury in his voice was worse than any shout could have been. 15 years, Corbyn. You helped raise me into this business." "Security," Kaylin said, not taking his eyes off Corbyn. "Please escort Mr. Mercer out of this house and hold him until the authorities and our legal counsel can determine the appropriate next steps." As two security officers moved to Corbyn's side, the older man's composure finally broke entirely, his voice rising in desperation. "Holloway isn't finished, Kaylin. Whatever you think you've stopped tonight, he has more coming. He's not going to let this go quietly, not with what he's already invested." Kaylin watched him being led from the room without responding, and once the door closed behind them, he turned to the remaining executives, his voice steady again despite everything. "I want every route, every contract, every signature this company has processed in the past year reviewed by tomorrow morning," he said. "And someone get me everything we can find on Rourke Holloway's current public schedule. If he's not finished, then neither are we." The invitation had arrived on Kaylin's desk 3 days earlier, before any of this had started. An embossed card announcing the Maritime Industry Alliance's annual gala at the Metropolitan Maritime Museum. Under normal circumstances, he would have sent regrets and let an assistant handle the appearance. Tonight, he read the guest list Vesper had pulled together and found the name that mattered most sitting near the top. Rourke Holloway was scheduled to speak. "He's using the gala to announce the takeover," Vesper said, standing in Kaylin's office as the sun set behind the harbour. "Look at the agenda. A special announcement regarding Northeast shipping route consolidation right after the keynote. That's not a coincidence. He's going to stand in front of every major player in this industry and claim your routes before your own board even finishes reviewing what Corbyn did." "He thinks Corbyn's arrest brought him nothing but a delay," Kaylin said. "He's moving up the timeline, betting that public pressure and industry momentum will force the routes his way before anyone can stop him." "Then we stop him there," Vesper said, "in front of everyone." The museum overlooked the water, its glass atrium lit gold against the evening sky, hundreds of guests in formal wear moving between exhibits of old maritime maps and restored ship models repurposed for the evening's reception. Vesper wore a deep green gown Kaylin's assistant had sourced on short notice, her tablet concealed in a small clutch, feeling entirely out of place among industry titans who'd spent decades building the kind of reputation she and Kaylin were about to unravel in a single night. "There," Kaylin murmured, nodding toward a tall, silver-haired man holding court near the harbour-facing windows, Rourke Holloway laughing easily with a cluster of shipping executives, utterly at ease in a room he clearly believed was already his. "Does he know about Corbyn's arrest?" Vesper asked. "He knows," Kaylin said. "I made sure the story reached the right channels this afternoon, which means everything about tonight, every confident smile you're about to watch him give, is a performance for exactly this crowd." They moved through the reception separately, Kaylin greeting old business associates with practiced warmth, while Vesper found a quiet corner near the museum's central display, connecting her tablet to the venue's technical staff under the guise of coordinating a promotional video the Dax family had supposedly commissioned for the evening. It wasn't difficult convincing the museum's event coordinator to grant her brief access to the master display system controlling the massive screens mounted throughout the atrium. A forged authorization letter and a confident smile carried her further than she'd expected. At exactly 8:30, Holloway stepped up to the small stage set against the harbour windows, tapping the microphone with the easy confidence of a man who'd rehearsed this moment for months. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," he began, his voice carrying warmly across the atrium. "The maritime industry thrives on trust, on relationships built over decades. Tonight, I'd like to share some exciting news about the future of Northeast shipping routes, a future built on stability and strength." Vesper's fingers moved across her tablet, cueing the file she and Kaylin had prepared that afternoon. The recovered manifest data, the original authorization signatures, the beacon tracking logs from Newark, all of it compiled into a clean, undeniable visual timeline. "For too long," Holloway continued, "certain legacy operators in this industry have struggled to maintain the standards our partners deserve. Tonight, I'm proud to announce that Holloway Maritime will be assuming operational control of several key Northeast freight corridors. Effective, the massive screens behind him flickered and changed. Instead of the promotional slideshow the museum's staff expected, the recovered manifest data filled every screen in the atrium simultaneously, container numbers and falsified declarations laid out beside their original, unaltered counterparts. The authorization signatures magnified for the entire room to see. A timeline stretched across the display, mapping every diverted shipment back to its source, ending with a single line connecting Sable Crane Holdings directly to Rourke Holloway's own name. The room went silent. Holloway turned, confusion flashing across his face before understanding hit him, his composure cracking in real time in front of every executive, journalist, and industry partner who mattered. "This is a fabrication," he said, his voice rising, no longer smooth. "Some kind of sabotage, clearly staged by a competitor desperate to discredit. The data is authenticated directly from a private archive with restricted physical access." Kaylin's voice cut through the room as he stepped forward, calm and certain in a way that commanded every eye toward him instead of Holloway. Alongside a signed confession from Corbin Mercer, currently in federal custody, detailing his arrangement with your company. Every document displayed tonight has already been submitted to the appropriate authorities. Whispers rippled through the crowd, phones rising to capture the unfolding scene, and Vesper watched Holloway's carefully built reputation dissolve in real time. Decades of industry standing collapsing under the weight of evidence he had no way to explain away in front of witnesses. "You planned this," Holloway said, turning toward Kaylin, all pretense gone now. "All of it, from the moment you found out about Corbin." "No," Kaylin said, "you planned this. I simply made sure the truth arrived at the same party you did." He glanced briefly toward Vesper, standing quiet and composed near the display controls, before turning back to the room. "My apologies for the disruption to tonight's program. I believe Mr. Holloway has an announcement of his own to make regarding his resignation from every industry board he currently holds a seat on." Holloway didn't answer. He looked once more at the screens still displaying his own signature, buried beneath layers of falsified paperwork, at the room full of people whose trust he'd need for the rest of his career, and then he simply walked, fast and silent, toward the nearest exit, leaving his prepared announcement unfinished on the stage behind him. Kaylin watched him go, then turned to find Vesper already crossing the room toward him, the tablet dark in her hand now, its work finished. "It's done," she said quietly. "No," Kaylin said, something steady and grateful in his voice as the room slowly began to fill again with stunned conversation around them. "It's just beginning." The morning after the gala, sunlight poured through the windows of Kaylin's executive suite in a way it hadn't in weeks, clean and undramatic, the ordinary light of a Tuesday that somehow felt different from every day that had come before it. Vesper sat across from him at the same desk where he'd first learned about Sable Crane Holdings, though the office looked different now too, the corkboard of shipping schedules replaced overnight with a fresh whiteboard mapping out the company's next steps, security protocols circled in red, a full audit of every route and contract scheduled to begin within the week. "The board called an emergency session this morning," Kaylin said, setting his phone down after the third call in an hour. Holloway resigned from every board seat he held by midnight. 2 more executives at his company have already been named in the federal filing. Corbin's lawyer is negotiating a plea deal, Cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. How do you feel about that? Vesper asked. Kaylin considered the question longer than she expected. Angry, still. Betrayed, obviously. But mostly I keep thinking about what he said, right before security took him out of the house. That Holloway wasn't finished, that there was more coming. He shook his head slowly. There wasn't. It turns out the entire operation depended on him staying invisible. The moment we pulled him into the light, there was nothing left holding it together. That's usually how it works, Vesper said. People like Holloway build empires out of what nobody's willing to look at closely. The second someone does, the whole structure collapses, because it was never actually strong. It just looked strong, because nobody had tested it. Kaylin studied her for a long moment, something warm settling into his expression that hadn't been there in the harbor warehouse 3 nights earlier, back when he'd looked at her like a problem to be removed, rather than the reason his company still existed intact. I've been thinking about something since last night, he said. Ashcroft Dunmore's contract with my board runs another 4 months, correct? The original audit assignment. Something like that. I want to buy it out. Early termination, whatever their fee requires. He leaned forward slightly. Not because I want you gone sooner, because I want to offer you something else entirely, and I don't think it makes sense to do that while you're still technically employed by someone else. Vesper raised an eyebrow, curiosity replacing the wariness that had followed her through most of the last 3 days. What kind of something else? Chief Security Auditor, Kaylin said. A permanent position, reporting directly to the board rather than to me, with full independent authority to investigate any part of this company at any time without needing anyone's clearance first. I don't ever want another Corbin Mercer sitting 15 years unnoticed inside my organization. I need someone who can find what I can't see and who's proven she's not afraid to tell me the truth even when it costs her something. Vesper sat quietly for a moment, turning the offer over. It was more than she'd expected walking into this office days ago as a woman caught trespassing in a warehouse. More than most auditors saw in an entire career. But she'd learned enough about this company and about herself over the past 3 days to know that accepting it without conditions would be its own kind of mistake. I'll take it, she said, on my own terms. Name them. I don't report through any layer of your executive structure, not even the board chair, without a direct line I control myself. If I find something wrong, I decide when it's ready to be shown, not someone worried about quarterly numbers or industry relationships. And if I ever find something involving you, personally, I need to know you'll treat that the same way you treated Corbin. No exceptions, no protecting the family name over the truth. Kaylin didn't hesitate. Agreed. All of it. Even the last part. Especially the last part, he said. My father used to say the day this company gets dirty is the day I've lost it, no matter how much money keeps coming in. I believed that was about protecting the business. I understand now it was about protecting the people who trust it. You proved that mattered more than I ever gave it credit for, and I'm not interested in building something that only survives because nobody's willing to look closely at it. Vesper felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying since the moment she'd first opened those restricted cargo logs 11 nights running, driven by instincts she hadn't been able to fully explain even to herself. She'd expected this assignment to end quietly, a report filed, a paycheck collected, another company's secrets catalogued and forgotten. She hadn't expected to find someone on the other side of it, willing to rebuild everything around the truth instead of burying it. Then I accept, she said. Chief Security Auditor, full independence, direct line to the board. Kaylin extended his hand across the desk, and Vesper shook it, the gesture formal, but carrying something underneath it that neither of them named out loud. Not yet. Not with everything still so raw and recent. There's one more thing, he said, as their hands finally parted. The night I confronted you in that warehouse, I told you that you'd broken the trust this company runs on. I want you to know I don't believe that anymore. I think you're the reason this company still has any trust left to run on at all." Outside the window, the harbour stretched wide and calm under the morning sun, cranes shifting cargo in slow, deliberate arcs, containers moving exactly where they were supposed to go, every manifest matching what actually sat inside. It would take months to fully untangle everything Halloway and Corbin had built in the shadows, and Vesper knew better than most that no company stayed clean forever without someone willing to keep checking. But for the first time in 11 nights, she wasn't checking alone.